Welcome. Welcome to my kitchen, and today we're going to be making apple and dumplings. Now I say apple and dumplings because usually when you hear the word apple and dumplings together, you think of apple dumplings, which is a recipe where it's most common. You'll see it in the stores, you'll see it online a lot, where you take your apple, you core it, you peel it, put sugar or cinnamon on it, and then you wrap it in dough. And the recipe we're going to be making today is, I would say it's called apple and dumplings. And the reason being, this recipe is an old Pennsylvania German, Pennsylvania Dutch recipe. Actually, the recipe I'm going to be using comes from a storybook or cookbook from 1915, and it's called Mary on the Farm. And I'm going to put a link for it in the description. It's a great storybook. It's written by Edith Thomas. And what she did is she spent a lot of time at the turn of the century visiting different Pennsylvania German, Pennsylvania Dutch farms in the Pennsylvania area. And she went around, got to know the people. She gathered a bunch of recipes of what they were making at that time, and she put them in called a storybook, because it's a fictional account of a girl named Mary who was 19, and she's visiting different family and farms in the area. So it's a great read. I'm going to put a link for it. You can get it online and read it for free, so you don't have to go out and buy it. But great storybook. But there's a recipe in there for apple dumplings. And again, I call it apple and dumplings, using more today's terminology, because what it is you actually cook up the apples first, get them ready, and then you drop in your dumplings, just like you would with chicken and dumplings. And it's a great dish. And the nice thing about it is a stovetop dish. You don't have to bake anything. You prepare everything on the stovetop. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to put the recipe up on the screen here. And you just start. It says here a cup of sugar, 2 cups of water, a cup of butter. Cook up your apples in here. And then once the apples are ready, then you go ahead and you make your dumplings, and then you just drop your dumplings in and let them cook for 20 minutes. So I'm going to follow this recipe. I'm going to update it a little bit the way I would make it, just a couple changes here and there. And so let's get to it. I hope you like it. We're going to be making some Pennsylvania Dutch, Pennsylvania German apple and dumplings, and I think you'll like it. So I got 4 good sized apples, and what I did is cored them, peeled them, and sliced them, and put them in my Dutch oven here. And the apples I'm using are called Crimson Gold, and I prefer them. I really like them for cooking. They're kind of sour, kind of sweet, but the one nice thing about them, they really hold up when you cook. The last thing you want is an apple that's going to get all mushy. So they're really, really good baking apples. I'm going to put a little story about them in the description here of the video. And the one nice thing about cooking, every time you cook and you start researching things, you find all kind of interesting stories. Like I mentioned earlier, the book Mary on the Farm, the history of crimson apples, and how this apple was almost lost and how it was rediscovered. So if you like reading that kind of stuff, I'll put those links. If you don't, don't worry about it. So I took those apples and I just covered them with enough water to cover them up here in the Dutch oven. And the next thing I'm going to add, the recipe calls for a full cup of sugar, which to me is a lot too much for my taste. So I'm actually only going to use about 1/3, and I like brown sugar. So for these kind of dishes, I think brown sugar works a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and just put my brown sugar in. And the recipe also calls for a tablespoon of butter. So I got my tablespoon of butter here. I'm just going to drop that in. Recipe also doesn't actually call for these things, but I like them. I always add this when I make any kind of apple dish. I like a little bit of cinnamon in there, so I took a teaspoon of cinnamon, and we're just going to put that in while it cooks. And the other thing I like is I'm going to put a teaspoon of vanilla in, and pure vanilla extract. I think that just helps with the flavor of any kind of apple crisp or apple dumplings, anything to do with apples. I think a little bit of vanilla mixed in there also adds to the flavor. So I'm using the original recipe, but as you'll see, I'm making it my own. I'm just adding the things that I like. So let me just mix that up here just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on the stovetop and we'll start heating it up. We want to bring it to boil, but while it's boiling we're going to start preparing our dumplings. So as we're bringing our apples to a boil over on the stovetop, we're going to go ahead and mix up our dumplings. And the recipe calls for a cup of flour, so we're just going to measure it out. And I always spoon my flour in just because I think that keeps it from getting over full. And once I get it there, I just kind of just top it off. So we're going to put a cup in here. We're going to sift that. And it also calls for 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So we'll put that in. So sifting it, what that's going to do is going to make your dumplings a little bit more fluffy. Now the recipe also calls to add a pinch of salt. Now if you ever wondered what a pinch of salt was, this is at least what my grandma told me. Now if you want a pinch of salt, you use your 3 fingers, put it in. If you want half a pinch, you use 2 fingers. So I don't know how true that is, but that's how she taught me, because she used to always say a pinch of salt, and that's how she would do it. Again, my cuckoo clock going off in the background, sorry about that. So that's a pinch of salt according to my grandmother. So once that's put together, we're going to actually take 3/4 of a cup of milk. And we're just going to use a fork and just kind of gently mix that together. So it's got to be a little bit more heavy than like a pancake mix or something like that, but you just want it kind of crumbly, because we're just going to be dropping this in as our dumplings. So I'm going to try not to mix it too much, but at the same time I just want to make sure I get everything mixed together. So that looks pretty good. I mean, that's it. According to the recipe, this is how we're going to do the dumplings. So I'm going to leave that sit now. Can't get easier than that. Just adding a cup of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, pinch of salt, and 3/4 of a cup of milk. So we're going to let our dumpling mixture sit, and then we're going to go over and check on the apples. So we came over to the stovetop now that our dumplings are ready to go, and our apples are boiling. So let's just take a look at them here. And what we want to do, we want them to cook them, but not overcook them. We want to bring them to a boil and just let them boil for a couple minutes. The reason being is that we're going to be dropping in our dumplings here in a minute, and when we drop them in, they're going to be in here for 20 minutes cooking. So cooking covered, and we just want to make sure that we don't overcook the apples. But as I said, these Crimson Gold are great. They hold their consistency really well when you cook them up. So I think they're about ready. I'm going to give it about a minute or two, and keep it boiling. And then we're going to bring our dumplings over. So let's check it again. And looking good. It's boiling. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit here. But we want to keep it boiling when we put our dumplings in. So that looks pretty good. So the way you put your dumplings in, the easiest way to do it is you have a hot spoon. So I'm going to put the spoon in here just for a second ahead of time. Get it nice and hot, nice and warm. And then I'm just going to take a spoonful and I'm just going to drop it in. So just a little spoonful, they'll just drop right in to the mixture. But I always dip my spoon each time, and that just kind of helps it to release. So like I said, this is a lot different than apple dumplings you've probably seen in the store or maybe made in the past. But I think in many ways this might be an older recipe. And again, I don't call it apple dumplings, I call it apple and dumplings, because this is kind of the same way that you would go ahead and make chicken and dumplings or something like that. So let me just get the rest of it here. Looks like we got about one more spoonful there. And that's it. So let me show you a picture of that before we cover it. And we're going to then cover it for 20 minutes. So it's been about 20 minutes now, so we've been cooking the apples and the dumplings covered for that time. We haven't opened up the lid to see what it looks like. So let's take the lid off and see what we have. Now that looks pretty good to me. Let me bring the camera over, you can get a better look. So you can see how nice and airy the dumplings got and how everything's cooking up quite well. So I'm going to take it off the heat and I'm just going to let it cool down for a little bit, and then we're going to have a bite. So we let the apple and dumplings cool for a little bit, so now we're going to give them a try. The apples are perfect, and let's try the dumplings. I gotta say that recipe is from 1915 or even earlier than that. That's just when it was written down in the book. But this recipe from the Pennsylvania Dutch for apple dumplings or apple and dumplings, it's a great recipe. It's easy, stovetop. You don't gotta heat up the oven. And the recipe for the dumplings is super easy. The apple's super easy. So I love it. And so I'm happy I tried it. I'm gonna definitely be making this again. So I hope you enjoyed this video of making apple and dumplings the way it was recorded back in that book from 1915, Pennsylvania Dutch, Pennsylvania German style, and a lot easier than, I think anyway, from the oven style. So nice alternative. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go ahead and like it. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.